the cell that shouldn't exist. If you think you've heard every prison story out there, think again. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and buckle up, because what you're about to hear was never meant to leave the prison walls. The siren started at 2:14 a.m. inside Redwater State Penitentiary, a name whispered among correctional officers like a curse. Inmates called it the pit. Cameras caught nothing but flickering lights and shadows moving fast across the D-block corridor. By the time guards reached cell 39, the door was wide open and the most dangerous inmate in America, Marcus Reaper, Vance, was gone. Vance wasn't an ordinary criminal. He'd once been a decorated Marine sniper before his name hit national headlines for a string of contract killings that left the FBI chasing him for over a decade. Convicted on 18 counts of homicide, he was sentenced to life without parole. Yet, inside prison, he became something even more terrifying, an underground figure of power. Rumors said he ran the drug flow, settled disputes, and had guards on his payroll. But no one could explain how he managed to vanish from a locked cell surrounded by concrete and cameras. Detective Laura Chen was the first to arrive. She'd been investigating corruption inside Redwater for months, but this was different. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no tunnel. Just a neatly folded inmate uniform on the bed and a handwritten note that read, "You buried the wrong man." By morning, Redwater was in lockdown. Every inmate accounted for, except one. The warden, Harold Knox, looked pale under the fluorescent lights as he told reporters, "This facility is secure. No one escapes Redwater." But behind closed doors, he wasn't so sure. Knox had built his career on keeping the place airtight. Yet now one of the most notorious killers in U.S. history had disappeared without a trace. When Chen reviewed surveillance, she noticed something strange. Between 2:12 and 2:14 a.m., every camera on D-Block glitched, static, then darkness, then back online. The system had been overridden by an internal signal, not an outside hack. Someone inside the prison had done this. And then came the first real clue. While searching Vance's cell, officers found a piece of fabric wedged behind the toilet. An old prison patch with faded letters, North Point Federal. A different prison. One that had been shut down years ago after a deadly riot. Chen froze. She remembered the case file. North Point was where Vance had first been held before being transferred to Redwater. During that riot, 17 inmates died and several guards went missing. Among them, a man named Daniel Cortez, a correctional officer who'd never been found. Something didn't add up. Why would Vance leave behind a patch from a closed prison? Was it a taunt or a message? As Chen prepared to leave the cell, one of her team shouted from the hallway. A section of floor tiles had shifted near the drain pipe. Underneath, they found something metallic, a narrow shaft leading deep underground. And then, from the darkness below, came the unmistakable sound of a heartbeat monitor. The shaft beneath cell 39 wasn't part of any blueprint. The prison's maintenance record stopped at the floor level, yet below it stretched a narrow tunnel, reinforced with rusted steel beams and the stench of decay. The air was damp, heavy with mildew and something metallic, blood, maybe, or rust. Chen's flashlight cut through the dark, catching faded graffiti on the walls. Freedom isn't free. The tunnel extended at least 200 feet before splitting in two directions, one toward the abandoned boiler room, the other into blackness. The forensic team followed Chen's lead, crawling through the dirt in silence until they reached a small chamber. Inside, they found makeshift beds, cigarette butts, and food wrappers dated months back. Someone had been living down there, possibly multiple people. Back in the control room, Warden Knox was losing control. The media had already leaked word of the escape, and state officials were demanding answers. But what shook him most wasn't the press. It was a discovery Chen made next. Among the debris, she found a military-grade radio receiver and an ID tag belonging to Officer Daniel Cortez, the guard who vanished years ago during the North Point riot. Chen examined the tag, her pulse quickening. "If Cortez is alive," she murmured, "he's been inside this system the whole time." The deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. Files revealed that after the North Point riot, a secret transfer program had quietly moved a handful of surviving inmates and guards to other prisons under new names, experimental population control, classified by the Department of Corrections. Redwater, as it turned out, was one of those facilities. Someone had rebuilt North Point Underground, inside Redwater's forgotten foundation. The tunnel wasn't an escape route. It was a network. By the next morning, a storm raged outside as federal agents swarmed the prison. The team traced the tunnel's second path, which ended behind an old storage building on the east perimeter. The lock was smashed, and tire tracks led into the woods. That's when they found a second note, pinned under a rock. "He's not who you think." Chen's phone buzzed. An email with no sender. Attached was a single photo, Marcus Reaper Vance, standing in a dimly lit room beside Warden Knox, both men smiling. The timestamp? 2 days before the escape. Her stomach dropped. Knox had claimed he hadn't seen Vance in months. Why lie? When agents stormed his office, they found it empty, desk cleared, security hard drives wiped, and his access badge missing. A maintenance worker swore he saw Knox leaving the prison around 1:30 a.m., 40 minutes before the alarms went off. Now the story had flipped. The escape wasn't a breach. It was an inside job, and the man sworn to keep Redwater secure was at the center of it. Chen stared at the security map, eyes tracing the tunnels like veins beneath a diseased heart. Somewhere down there, Knox and Vance were moving together. But to where? Then the call came in from a ranger 40 miles north. A burned-out van found near the state border. Inside it a badge, a gun, and a charred photograph of a young woman in uniform. On the back, written in ashes, were 5 chilling words. "She's next. Stop digging, Laura." If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a story. You're a part of one. Smash that subscribe button before we go under, because once you hear what really happened inside Redwater, you'll never see justice the same way again. Detective Laura Chen arrived at the scene before sunrise. The forest was silent, except for the dripping of rain through the trees. The van's interior was almost completely burned out, except for one untouched object wedged beneath the seat, a flash drive, scorched but intact. Forensics recovered a few clips before it melted completely. What Chen saw confirmed everything. Marcus Vance wasn't running from system. He was working for it. The footage showed a dim interrogation room inside Redwater. Vance sat across from Warden Knox, his hands cuffed, but his eyes calm. Knox leaned in and said, "You're not a prisoner here, Marcus. You're my insurance policy." The timestamp proved it was filmed months before the supposed escape. Through more decrypted files, Chen pieced together the truth. After the North Point riot, Knox struck a secret deal with the Department of Corrections. Certain high-risk inmates were offered new identities in exchange for carrying out off-record operations, hits, intelligence trades, even assassinations connected to internal corruption. Marcus Vance was the first recruit. When the government pulled funding, Knox kept the program alive underground. Redwater wasn't penitentiary. It was a black site disguised as one. But something went wrong. Vance had discovered that Knox was selling inmate identities on the dark web, trading them to criminal networks for cash. Every death that looked like a prison suicide or transfer mishap was actually a data cover-up. When Vance confronted him, Knox turned the system against him, until Vance found a way out. The escape was revenge. It was exposure. The note, the tunnel, the glitches, each was designed to lead Chen straight to the truth. But if that was true, then why threaten her? As she drove back toward the city, headlights appeared behind her, fast, unrelenting. The rain blurred everything. Her tires skidded. The car spun, crashed into a guardrail, and stopped inches from a ravine. The other vehicle slowed beside her. Through the fog glass, she saw a silhouette step out, broad shoulders, calm stride. It was Knox. He tapped on her window, face expressionless. "You shouldn't have come this far, Laura. You were supposed to close the file." She reached for her weapon, but before she could, a second figure emerged from the darkness. Vance. He was bleeding, limping, but alive. The two men faced each other in silence. Then, without a word, Vance turned his gun on Knox and fired once. The warden collapsed beside the wreck. Vance looked at Chun, voice barely above a whisper. He thought he ran the system, but the system runs everyone. He tossed her a small metal drive. "This is everything. burn it or expose it. Either way, it's over. He walked into the trees before backup arrived. They searched all night. No trace. No footprints. No body. Weeks later, Redwater was shut down under federal investigation. Over 50 files of illegal transfers were uncovered, implicating multiple officials. Yet Marcus Reaper, Vance, was never found. In her final report, Chen wrote one line, "Some prisons don't need walls, they just need secrets." And 3 months later, an envelope arrived at her office with no return address. Inside was a photograph of Vance standing in front of a small cabin near a lake. On the back, written in black ink, "You chose exposure. Good choice. If you thought that was the end, you're wrong." Because 1 year later, another inmate vanished from a supposedly secure facility, leaving behind only 2 words scratched into his cell wall: "Redwater lives." Hit subscribe, because the next story might be even darker.